The county forester wrote it up as neglect. He came out to the Rusk place in the fall on a routine cost-share inspection, walked the young orchard on the east slope, and marked in his notebook that the operator had failed to remove standing dead timber from the windward edge of the planting, and that this constituted poor management, and that the cost-share payment would be reduced accordingly. The operator was Bram Rusk, and he was 16 years old, and he had not failed to remove anything. He had left those dead trees standing on purpose, and he had a reason, and the forester did not ask him for it, and Bram did not offer it. There were 9 of them, big dead oaks, and 1 enormous shagbark hickory, gray and barkless and long past living, standing in a ragged line across the top of the slope, where the new apple trees came right up to their feet. Any sensible person would have dropped them for firewood years ago. They were an eyesore. They leaned. In a hard wind they groaned. And every man who drove past the Rusk place on the Coldwater Road had an opinion about why they were still standing. And the opinion was always the same. The boy is lazy. The boy inherited a good piece of ground from his uncle, and he cannot even be bothered to clear the dead wood off the top of it. Look at it. 9 dead trees over a young orchard, waiting to come down on the very fruit trees he is supposed to be raising. That is not a farmer. That is a boy, playing at farming on a dead man's land. They said it at the sale barn in Corydon, and they said it at church, and some of them said it to his face. And Bram Rusk, who had not asked for any of this, who had been perfectly happy before, said nothing back and left the trees exactly where they were. 2 winters later, when the ice came down on Wayne County, Iowa, and took the orchards off half the hills in that township, every one of those men was going to drive out to the Rusk place and look at the one planting that survived, and look at the 9 dead trees standing over it, and understand at last what the lazy boy had done. If stories about patience, hard-won judgment, and the wisdom that hides in plain sight mean something to you, subscribe and join our farming family, and tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from tonight. We would love to know how far this story has traveled. Wayne County sits along the bottom edge of Iowa. Rolling ground, good ground, the kind of gentle, open farmland that the whole middle of the country is made of. It is not gentle in an ice storm. Southern Iowa lies in a bad corridor for a particular kind of winter weather, the freezing rain event, where warm, moist air rides up over a shallow layer of freezing air near the ground. The rain falls as liquid, then freezes the instant it touches anything, and it builds. It builds on wires, and it builds on roads, and above all it builds on trees, coating every twig and branch in a growing shell of clear ice, ounce by ounce, until limbs that have held their own weight for 40 years come down all at once under a load they were never built to carry. An orchard is especially helpless. Apple trees are pruned wide and open, with their branches held out horizontal to catch the sun and carry fruit. And that same open horizontal shape is the worst possible shape for shedding ice. A young orchard on an exposed hilltop, taking the full weight of a freezing rain with nothing between it and the sky, can be destroyed in a single night. Every scaffold limb split down to the trunk. A decade of grafting and shaping and waiting snapped off in the dark. Bram Rusk had not planted that orchard. His uncle Dell had. Dell Rusk was a bachelor and a fine grower, and he had spent the last 15 years of his life turning that east slope into 300 apple trees. And when he died with no children of his own, the ground came to Bram, who was his sister's boy, and who was 14 when it happened, and had been planning on no such thing. Bram did not want an orchard. He wanted to be left alone, and instead he had been handed 300 trees, a set of expectations he had never signed up for, and a whole county watching to see whether the sister's boy could keep up what Dell Rusk had built. His mother, Verna, moved them both out to the place. She kept the house and she kept Bram fed, and she told him, more than once, that his uncle had trusted him with something, and that he would tend it whether he had asked for it or not. So Bram tended it, grudgingly at first, and then, without quite noticing when it happened, less grudgingly. The dead trees were not part of any plan. That is the part nobody understood. Bram did not set out to save the orchard with dead oaks. He backed into it by accident, the way most real knowledge gets found. The winter he was 15, his first full winter on the place, an early wet snow came down heavy and clinging, and it broke limbs all over the young orchard, and Bram spent a miserable week cutting and cleaning up. But he noticed something while he was doing it. The damage was not even. The trees at the top of the slope, in the lee of that ragged line of dead oaks, had come through almost clean. The trees just downhill of him were wrecked. He did not know why. He filed it away. That summer, he did what he thought was the right thing and started cutting the dead trees down. He dropped 2 of them, the 2 on the far south end, cleaned them up for firewood, felt good about it, felt like a real manager finally clearing the junk his uncle had let stand. And the following winter the wet snow came again, and this time the trees at the south end of the top row, the 2 now standing in the open where the dead oaks used to be, broke as badly as any in the orchard. That was the accident that taught him. He had run the experiment without meaning to. He had removed the shelter from one end and left it on the other, and the winter had shown him the difference as plainly as if it had been drawn on paper. He stopped cutting. He left the 7 that remained. Here is what those dead trees were doing, and it is the whole reason the story turns. A standing dead tree, bare of leaves, is not much of a windbreak in the ordinary sense. But that is not what mattered here. What mattered is that in a freezing rain, the ice lands on whatever is highest and most exposed first, and it lands there hardest. The dead oaks and the big hickory stood a full 30 feet taller than the young apple trees at their feet. They were the tallest things on that hilltop by far. In a freezing rain they took the brunt of it, their high bare crowns catching the wind-driven ice, their limbs bleeding it and shedding it, and slowing the moving air just enough that the freezing rain reaching the orchard below came down softer, straighter, with less wind behind it to drive the ice deep into every crevice. More than that, a dead tree is expendable in a way a living orchard is not. A dead oak can lose a limb to ice, and it does not matter, because it is already dead. It is a sacrifice standing there on the ridge, a thing built by 40 years of growth, whose only remaining job was to stand between the weather and the trees that could still be heard. Del Rusk had known that. That was the thing the whole county missed. Bram found the uncle's reason after he had already found it himself. In a note in the margin of Del's spray record, 4 words in pencil, next to a diagram of the east slope. Leave the tall dead ones. Del had left them on purpose, and then he had died before he could tell anyone why. And a boy who did not want the orchard had very nearly cut down the one thing protecting it before an accident stopped his hand. It did not go smoothly, keeping them. It went wrong in a dozen small ways. The forester docked his cost share, which cost real money the operation could not spare. A limb did come down off the hickory one summer and crushed 4 young trees, and every man who had called him lazy had a fine time with that at the sale barn. The insurance adjuster, when Verna tried to get the place covered, listed the standing dead timber as a hazard and raised the premium. A cousin who thought he should have gotten the land in the first place told the neighbors the boy was going to get somebody killed. And Bram, who was 16 and unsure of nearly everything, lay awake more than one night, wondering if the whole county was right, and he was a fool clinging to a dead man's habit he did not really understand. The one man who did not laugh was the last man Bram would have expected. Otis Feltner farmed the orchard on the next hill west, and he was the closest thing Bram had to a competitor, an older grower who had sold apples in that county for 30 years and who had never much cared for Del Rusk. and did not obviously care for Dale's nephew either. When Bram left the dead trees standing, Otis Feltner was the one man in the township who looked at that ridge and did not see Laziness. He drove over one evening, uninvited, and stood at the edge of the orchard, and he asked Bram straight out why he had kept the dead ones. Bram told him the truth. He told him about the wet snow, and the 2 trees he had cut, and the difference the next winter, and he told him about the 4 words in the margin of his uncle's book. Otis Feltner listened to all of it without a word. Then he said that Del Rusk had been a stubborn and difficult man, and mostly wrong about most things, but that he had not been wrong about this, and that a smart man learns the most from the neighbor he likes the least. And then he told Bram something Bram had not worked out on his own, which was that it was not only the wind, it was the radiant cold. On a clear, killing night, the open sky pulls heat straight up off everything under it, and a canopy overhead, even a bare dead one, holds some of that heat down against the ground, and the trees beneath it. A few degrees. On the nights, a few degrees was the whole game. Otis Feltner became, without either of them ever calling it that, the teacher the boy had never had. The ice came in the last week of January, 2 winters after the forester wrote him up. It came the way the bad ones always come. Quiet, almost warm, a soft rain in the dark that nobody thought much of until they heard the first limb go. Then another. Then, all across Wayne County, the sound of a hard winter breaking the trees, a cracking that went on all night, sharp reports up and down every hill like something being torn apart very slowly. By morning, it had put down better than an inch of clear ice on everything that stood. Otis Feltner lost half his orchard. 30 years of trees, split and ruined on the open west hill with nothing above them. The scaffold limbs peeled down off the trunks under a weight of ice they could not carry. 2 other orchards in the township were destroyed outright. The young plantings the Extension Service had been so proud of, out on the clean, bare hilltops, with every dead tree responsibly cleared away, took the ice full on the crown and came apart. On the Rusk East slope, under 7 dead oaks and 1 great gray hickory, the orchard stood, not untouched. The lower rows lost some wood, but the top of that slope, in the shadow of the tall dead trees that had caught the ice and slowed the wind, and held the killing cold off the ground, came through the worst ice storm in 40 years with barely a broken scaffold. The dead hickory had lost 2 more limbs. It did not matter. It was already dead. It had done the only thing left for it to do. The men came out to look. They came the way they always come, quietly in 2s and 3s, boots crunching on a county still sheathed in ice. They stood at the bottom of the Rusk slope and looked up at the living orchard standing whole under the dead trees. And then they looked over west at Otis Feltner's ruined hill, and nobody laughed, and nobody said the word lazy, and most of them did not say anything at all. That should be where it ends. It is not quite where it ends, because the Extension Service wrote it up. Eventually, the whole business of the sheltering dead timber in the ice, and it went into a bulletin, and then into a workshop the district held 2 counties over. And the name on the bulletin was the district foresters, the same office that had docked Bram's cost share for neglect, and it described the technique as a promising management practice under study. And it did not mention a 16-year-old boy anywhere in it. And it did not mention Del Rusk at all. Bram Rusk read that bulletin at the feed store and set it back down on the counter and did not say anything about it. Otis Feltner was there, and he read it too, and he was angrier about it than Bram was. He said out loud that it was a theft, and that everybody in the room knew whose slope that idea had come off of. And Bram told him to let it go. He said the trees did not care whose name was on the paper. He said Del had not left them standing to get his name on anything. That was the end of it. The credit went where credit usually goes, which is to the office with the letterhead. And the boy who kept the trees and the dead man who first left them got nothing but a living orchard, which, as it turned out, was the only thing either of them had ever actually wanted. Bram Rusk grew apples on that slope for 50 years. He never cut the dead trees. As they finally fell, one by one, decade by decade, he let others grow tall and left them standing dead in their turn, replacing the shelter deliberately, on purpose, the way his uncle had, so that there were always tall dead sentinels on the ridge above the fruit. His own nephews asked him about it once, near the end, why a good grower would keep dead trees over a living orchard, and whether it was the wind or the cold or the ice that the trees were really turning aside. Bram Rusk thought about it a while. Then he told them he had spent 50 years up there, and he still was not entirely sure which of the three it was. And maybe, he said, it did not matter, as long as you left them standing. Did you ever do the right thing for a reason you could not fully explain? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. And if this story meant something to you, subscribe and let us know where you are watching from tonight.